Roman Vance was 41 years old, a man who had spent the first half of his life learning that the loudest person in any room is almost never the most dangerous one. He worked now as a maritime safety instructor, teaching crews how to stay calm when the water came over the rail. He drove a plain truck he kept immaculate. He moved through the world quietly, spoke little, and stood in a way that people who knew what to look for recognized, and people who didn't mistook for softness. That cold night, in the gravel lot outside his own house, his wife's lover stepped out of a black SUV with 5 other men behind him, cracking his knuckles, grinning, saying he'd come to teach the quiet husband a lesson he wouldn't forget. Roman set down the bag of groceries he was carrying. He looked at the 6 of them, unhurried, the way you'd read weather coming in off the sea. They had no idea that the calm man in front of them had spent a decade in places they'd only seen in movies, and that the only reason this was going to end badly for them was that they'd mistaken his stillness for fear. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The gravel lot was lit by a single pole light that Roman had wired himself, and the cold came off the bay 2 blocks down with the smell of salt in it. He stood with the groceries at his feet and counted, without seeming to count, the things a man counts when 6 people arrange themselves in front of him, where their hands were, who was actually willing and who was just there for the crowd, where the SUV sat, where the dark edges of the lot were, how far it was to his own door. He felt something settle in his chest, not fear, something quieter, older, trained, the particular calm of a man who had been in rooms far worse than this one and had learned that panic was the only thing in such moments that reliably got people hurt. For 3 years, Roman had been the kind of man who kept his word like it was the only currency that mattered. He'd left the service quietly, told almost no one what he'd done in it, and built an ordinary life on purpose, because ordinary was what he'd been fighting for the whole time. When his wife Larissa wanted a calmer man than the one she'd married, he gave her calm. He never raised his voice. He never brought the hard parts of his past into the house. He gave her steadiness, because steadiness was the hardest one thing he owned, and giving it was the only way he knew how to say he loved her. What she never saw was what the calm cost him to keep. The nights early in the marriage when a car door slamming too hard would put him, for a half second, somewhere else entirely, and he'd breathe through it quietly so she'd never have to know. The way he chose, every single day, to leave the door to that part of himself closed, because he'd decided that a home was a place you protected from the things you'd seen, not a place you brought them into. He cooked on his grandmother's old skillet. He fixed what broke before anyone asked. He showed up to her family's dinners and listened more than he talked, and let her father, who'd never served at anything, explain the world to him. He did it all without once mentioning that the quiet man passing the bread had carried other men out of places none of them could find on a map. He hadn't seen until lately that she'd come to read his calm as weakness, that somewhere in the steadiness he'd worked so hard to give her, she'd grown bored and had started mistaking the absence of chaos for the absence of a man. She'd started spending time with a man named Dove, loud, broad, a local who ran with a crowd that confused volume for strength, and had told Dove somewhere along the way that her husband was a pushover who'd never do anything about anything. She'd said it, Roman would later understand, almost as a complaint, as if she wished he were the kind of man who'd give her a reason to be afraid. Never once grasping that she'd married a man who'd spent his whole life making sure the people near him never had to be. Then, that night, and everything changed. Dove had planned it. Roman noticed that the way he noticed things, quietly, without announcing it, without deciding yet what it meant. 6 men don't assemble by accident. They'd come in one vehicle, which meant it was organized. Dove was out front, doing the talking, which meant Dove needed the other 5 more than they needed him. And the 5 behind him stood wrong, too loose, too pleased with themselves. Men who had never in their lives been in something that turned truly serious and didn't know the difference between a story they'd tell later and a thing that could actually go wrong. "You don't say much, do you?" Dove said, grinning, rolling his shoulders for the audience of his friends. "Larissa told me. Said you'd just stand there. Said you'd never lift a finger. We came to find out." He stepped closer. Time somebody taught the quiet man a lesson. Roman said nothing. He looked at Dove, and then, briefly, passed him at the 5, long enough that 2 of them shifted their weight and stopped grinning, because there is a kind of look that men who've actually seen violence give, and it is not a threat, it is an assessment. And some animal part of a person recognizes when they are being assessed by someone for whom this is not new. "You should take your friends home," Roman said. His voice was even, almost kind. "Nobody here wants what they think they want." "Listen to this guy," Dove said, and laughed, and looked back at his men to make sure they were laughing too. That was his mistake. Not a punch. Just that. He took his eyes off the calm man to perform for his crowd. The way a man does when the crowd is the only thing holding his courage together. What Larissa had never understood, what Dove was about to spend the next 90 seconds and then the next several months failing to understand, was the difference between a man who wouldn't fight and a man who had spent 10 years learning exactly how little fighting it takes when you actually know how, and how much it costs, and why you avoid it until the precise moment you can't. 10 years earlier, Roman had been someone the men in that gravel lot could not have imagined. He didn't talk about it, then or now, and the script of his life had a long stretch in the middle that he kept folded away the way you keep things that are true and heavy and not for display. He had served in a naval special warfare unit. He had done the training that breaks most people and the deployments that change the ones who finish it. He had learned, in the hardest possible classroom, the thing that civilians never quite believe, that the most skilled, dangerous men are almost always the calmest and the most reluctant, because they alone fully understand the price, and they spend that knowledge buying everyone around them a way out of the fight, right up until the second the way out closes. He'd left it behind on purpose. He'd wanted a small life by the water, a wife, a job teaching frightened crews to breathe. He never told Larissa more than the outline. She knew he'd been in the Navy. She'd called it ancient history, his quiet thing, and never asked the real questions, because the calm he'd brought home was so complete that she came to believe it was all there had ever been. He let her believe it. The not needing to prove it was, to him, the whole point of having survived. That was what Larissa hadn't understood. And neither had Dove. What happened in the gravel lot did not happen the way Dove's 5 friends had pictured it on the drive over. It happened faster and with far less drama, and it left almost no story worth bragging about, which is its own kind of lesson. Roman did not throw the first thing. He never does. That, too, is training. He gave them every exit. He told them again, low, to go home. When the first of the 5 finally moved, encouraged by Dove, embarrassed into it by the others, Roman did the small economical things a person learns when their life has depended on economy of motion. He was not where the man expected him to be. And then the man was on the gravel, not badly hurt, just suddenly and confusingly down, his own momentum having done most of the work. It was not a movie. There was no choreography. There was a quiet man who understood leverage and distance and timing the way Roman's grandfather had understood wood. and there were 5 men who understood only volume. And the gap between those two kinds of knowledge closed in about the time it takes to read this sentence. It did not become a brawl, because Roman did not let it. He controlled the space the way he'd been taught to control a space, not by hurting as many people as possible, but by making it instantly, physically obvious that the thing they'd come to do was not available, and that continuing would cost far more than any of them had actually been willing to pay when they were laughing in the SUV. 2 of the 5 simply stepped back with their hands half raised, the fight going out of them the moment it stopped being free. One helped the man on the gravel up. The audience Dove had needed evaporated. And a man like Dove, without an audience, is just a loud man, standing alone in a cold lot. Roman never touched Dove at all. He didn't need to. He just looked at him, in the quiet that had replaced the noise, and Dove, who had come to teach the quiet man a lesson, discovered that he'd been the one enrolled. "Take them home," Roman said again, the same even voice as before, as if nothing had happened, which was nearly true. "And don't come back here. Not because of what I'll do, because of what I won't have to." He didn't move fast after that, either. That was the part Larissa had never been able to account for. She had spent 3 years deciding exactly what kind of man Roman was. She had been wrong about the most important thing. She had mistaken peace for the absence of capacity. It wasn't. The peace was a choice he made every single day. The choice of a man who'd seen the alternative up close and wanted no part of it in his home. She'd looked at the most disciplined man she'd ever meet and called him a pushover, because she had never once had a reason to watch him stop being peaceful and had assumed there was nothing there to stop. Roman understood, the way the sea had taught him, that the dangerous water is never the loud water. The waves you can hear are spending their energy where you can see it. The thing that pulls a strong swimmer under is the quiet current that gives no sign at all. He had spent 10 years being that current, and the rest of his life trying not to be. And the men in the lot had walked into the bay on a calm day and called it safe. So, he did the calm, correct things. He did not chase anyone. He did not retaliate. He filed a report with the police that night, precise, factual, unembellished. The report of a man trained to write exactly what happened, and nothing he couldn't stand behind, and he did it not out of vengeance, but because 6 men arriving at a home to assault its owner is a thing the law is actually built for, and Roman had spent his whole life believing in doing things through the channels that hold. Adele Marsh, the older woman who ran the front office at the Maritime School and had watched Roman teach frightened deckhands to be brave, called him the next morning. She'd heard. "In a town by a bay, people hear. Walter says you should let him handle the paperwork side," she said. Walter was Roman's attorney. Patient, methodical, the kind of man who called at 7 in the morning and never put drama into anything. "Come by. Eat something. Then tell me what you actually want out of this. Because the way you want it is the way it'll go." Her kitchen smelled of coffee and cedar and something faintly sweet. She set a plate in front of him and waited until he'd eaten before she said anything real. "You could end that man," she said simply. "Not with your hands. With the report, the witnesses, the charges. Organized assault. 6 men, premeditated, that's not a bar fight. Roman, that's a thing that follows a person for years. You could make Dove's life very small. And no one would blame you." Roman turned his coffee a quarter turn on the table. "I don't want to end him," he said. "I want it to stop. And I want it on the record, so that if it ever isn't stopped, the record's already there. There's a difference between protecting yourself and destroying someone, because you can. I spent a long time around men who'd forgotten the difference. I didn't like who they became. Adele studied him over the rim of her glasses, the way she'd studied a great many men across 31 years of running an office full of them. Most men in your position would want blood, she said. Or the legal version of it. 6 men came to your home, Roman. Your wife pointed them at you. No one would say a word if you took it as far as it could go. I know, he said. That's exactly why I won't. The fact that I could is the whole reason I don't have to. He looked out her kitchen window toward the bay. When I was younger, I thought strength was how much you could do to someone. It took me a long time and some things I won't talk about to understand it's the opposite. Strength is how much you can do, and how little of it you choose to use. Anybody can swing when they're cornered. The discipline is in not swinging when you're not, even when every part of you has earned the right to. That's a hard way to live, Adele said. It's the only way I found that lets a man sleep, Roman said. She was quiet a moment. Then, the way another person might say I breathe. What do you want, then? I want the truth in the daylight, Roman said. That's usually enough. The truth in the daylight does more to a man like Dove than my hands ever could. He needs the dark in a crowd. Take both away, and there's not much left of him to punish. He was right about that, in the end. It did not happen all at once. The police report, with the names of the 5 men who'd come along and quickly decided they wanted no further part of it, did most of the work on its own. Faced with a precise account from witnesses and a victim who, it turned out, was extraordinarily calm and credible and clearly the wronged party, the 5 men were eager to make statements, each of them anxious to be the one who'd hung back. Dove's version, that he'd gone to confront a man over an affair, collapsed under the simple documented fact that he had brought 5 others to do it. The charge that came down was not a story he could tell as a victory. It was the kind of thing that costs a man his job, his standing, the crowd that had made him feel large. Without the crowd, Dove was what he'd always been, loud and alone, and now on a record. Larissa filed for divorce, or Roman did. In the end, it hardly mattered who signed first. He did not fight her, and he did not punish her. The settlement was clean and fair, and not a cent more, because fairness was the point, and cruelty had never been. She walked away with what was hers. She had assumed, for 3 years, that she'd married a soft man, and she spent a long time afterward unable to explain to anyone, least of all herself, how she had lived beside the most disciplined person she would ever meet and mistaken his peace for a lack of anything underneath it. She was carrying the weight of what she had chosen, the way a person carries something they cannot set down, not dramatically, just constantly. There had been one of the 5, the youngest, who in the gravel lot had been the first to step back, and the one who'd helped the downed man up. He came by the Maritime School a week later, awkward, not quite meeting Roman's eyes, and said he'd only gone along because the others were going, and that he was sorry, and that he hadn't understood what they were actually doing until he was standing in it. Roman didn't lecture him. He asked the young man if he had work. He didn't. Not really. Roman told him the school always needed hands on the docks, and that if he showed up Monday, on time, he'd teach him something worth knowing. The young man showed up Monday. He turned out to be steady, once he was around steadiness. Roman never mentioned the lot again, and neither did he. Roman did not become a different man. He went back to the school and taught the next class of frightened crews how to breathe when the water came over the rail. He answered every call the same day. He kept his truck immaculate. He kept being, by deliberate daily choice, the calm man, now that everyone in town understood finally what the calm was made of. People treated him a little differently after, with a respect that had a quiet edge of awe in it, and he found he didn't much want that either. He'd never been calm to be admired for it. He'd been calm because he'd seen what the opposite did to people, and he'd chosen, with everything he had, not to be that. 14 months later, he refinished the small boat he kept down at the bay, the one he took out alone on still mornings, over 3 weekends. He sanded it down to bare wood and built it back up the way his grandfather had taught him to treat anything worth keeping. Slowly, by hand, no shortcuts. The young man from the docks helped him on the last weekend, and Roman taught him how to read the grain so the finish would hold against the salt. Adele came by and brought a small potted succulent, no card, just the plant. He set it on the windowsill of his quiet house. He watered it on Thursdays. On a clear evening in early spring, Roman sat on the seawall at the edge of the bay with a glass of water and watched the light go long and flat across the water he loved precisely because it had taught him how to be still. The bay lay calm in front of him, the dangerous, quiet kind, and he knew exactly what it was, and he was at peace beside it. A man could spend his whole life learning that the calm and the danger were never opposites, that the same still water held both, and that the only question that ever mattered was what a man chose to be when he had the power to be either. He thought, for a moment, about 6 men in a gravel lot who'd mistaken the calmest thing in the lot for the safest. Then he stopped thinking about it, because it was no longer load-bearing in his life. He finished his water. He watched the last light leave the water and went inside and turned out the light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.